My brother demanded I spend my entire 2 week vacation renovating his house for free, the house I helped him buy, or he'd make sure the whole family knew I was too selfish to show up when it matters. My parents sided with him before I could say a single word. So I canceled the contractor I'd already hired on his behalf, withdrew the $11,000 I promised toward materials, and waited. They showed up at my apartment 3 days later with a U-Haul. That's when everything finally came apart. The tension headache had been sitting behind my right eye since Monday, and by Thursday night it had graduated into something meaner. I was lying on my couch in the dark, still in my work clothes, a half-eaten container of pad thai going cold on the coffee table. My phone showed 11:52 p.m. I just gotten off a call with my supervisor about the Henderson account, a deal I'd been nursing for 7 months that had finally closed that afternoon. It was the biggest commission of my career. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I was too tired to take off my shoes. I'm a commercial real estate broker. I'm 31. I work in a city where the cost of everything is aggressive, and the pace of everything is worse, and I have spent the last 4 years building something that actually looks like a life from the outside. Nice apartment, dependable car, savings account that doesn't give me anxiety. I did it by working through weekends and skipping vacations and eating lunch at my desk, probably 300 times a year. The 2 weeks I'd blocked off in my calendar starting the following Friday, the first real vacation I'd taken since a long weekend in Nashville 2 years ago, felt like oxygen. I'd been planning it as a surprise for my brother. Not a vacation for myself, I mean, but a renovation project I'd been quietly coordinating for 3 months. My brother has a 4-bedroom house about 40 minutes outside the city. He bought it 6 years ago with a down payment I contributed $18,000 toward, which he described to everyone as a loan from the family. A framing I never corrected because it wasn't worth the argument. He and his wife have 2 kids, 7 and 9. The house is fine, structurally, but it needs work. The kitchen is original from 1987. The master bath has had a slow leak that buckled the subfloor. The back deck is borderline dangerous. I've been quietly getting quotes, talking to contractors, planning to spend my vacation overseeing the work and helping where I could. I'd put $11,000 aside. It was going to be my gift to him, a real one. The kind of thing I'd been hoping, maybe naively, might finally make him look at me the way older brothers are supposed to look at younger sisters, with something resembling appreciation. I was still horizontal on the couch when my phone buzzed, text from my brother. I assumed it was something benign, a meme, a sports score, one of his kids saying something funny. I picked it up without sitting up. It was long. That was the first warning sign. He said he and his wife had been talking. He said the timing of my vacation worked out perfectly because they'd been wanting to do some work on the house, and they knew I had contacts in construction through my job. He said they figured since I was going to have 2 free weeks, I could basically project manage the whole thing for them, get the contractors in, be on site to supervise, handle the permits, coordinate delivery of materials. He said his wife wanted the kitchen redone, the deck replaced, the bathroom fixed, and while we were at it, the interior painted throughout. He said this would probably take most of the 2 weeks, but that's okay, because I didn't have anything else planned anyway. He did not ask if I had anything else planned. He did not ask if I wanted to do this. He did not mention paying me for my time or my expertise, both of which I use professionally and charge for. He ended the message with a thumbs up emoji and let me know what contractors you're thinking. I stared at the ceiling for a while. The headache pulsed. I thought about the conversation I'd been having with myself for 3 months about whether to tell him about the renovation surprise, whether he'd be moved by it, whether it would change something between us. The answer was apparently that it didn't matter, because he'd already decided I was available to do exactly this work, just as an obligation rather than a gift. I typed back carefully. I told him I actually did have plans for those 2 weeks. I told him I'd been planning to take a real vacation, probably somewhere with the beach, somewhere I could decompress after an incredibly demanding 7 months. I told him I was genuinely happy to help him find good contractors and could make some calls on his behalf, but I wasn't going to spend my entire vacation on-site supervising his renovation. He responded in about 4 minutes. I don't know why 4 minutes is significant, but it felt significant, like he hadn't needed any time to think, like my response was simply the wrong answer and required correction rather than consideration. He said I was always pulling this, which I didn't fully understand, but the implication was that I prioritized myself over the family routinely. He said his wife had already told the kids the house was getting fixed up and they were excited. He said I worked in real estate and this wasn't even hard for me. It was just phone calls and showing up. And the least I could do was contribute something real to the family instead of just writing checks. That last part landed like a slap. Writing checks, as if the $18,000 that made his down payment possible was something to be dismissed. As if the money I sent when his wife had her appendix out and they were underwater on medical bills, $3,400, I remember exactly, was a nothing. As if paying for both of his kids' first 2 years of private school tuition, which I'd done quietly because I wanted them to have good starts, was just what? Writing checks. The least I could do. I put the phone down and didn't respond. Not yet. My mom called me the next morning while I was on the treadmill. I let it go to voicemail. I knew. I just knew. And I needed a few more minutes of not knowing. She called again. I slowed the belt and picked up. She didn't say hello exactly. She said, "Your brother says you're refusing to help with the house." The word refusing was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Refusing implies something was owed. Refusing implies dereliction. I had simply said I had other plans. But in my family's translation, the two were apparently identical. I told her what I'd told him. Vacation. 7 months of brutal work. First real break in years. I'm happy to refer contractors. Not available to manage a full renovation on my own time. She made a sound I've been hearing my whole life. A soft exhale through the nose that communicates disappointment without requiring her to articulate it. Then she said your brother worked so hard and his wife has her hands full with the kids, and the house really is in bad shape, and I was always so good at this kind of thing and it would mean so much to them. I asked her, does he know I'd already been planning to fund the renovation as a surprise gift? Silence. I said it again. I told her I'd set aside $11,000. I had a contractor lined up. It was going to be my vacation project because I wanted to do something meaningful for him, and instead of that being something worth acknowledging, he sent me a task list. She said, well, you could still do it, just help them out while you're there. I asked her if she understood what I was saying. That I had planned to give him a gift and he had preemptively turned it into an expectation. She said, he didn't know about the surprise, sweetheart. You can't blame him for not knowing. That was true. I couldn't blame him for not knowing. But I could register that the moment he needed something from me, his instinct was not to ask. It was to assume. And my parents' instinct, presented with that information, was to smooth it over rather than to say, maybe thank your sister for what she was planning to do. My dad called that evening. He was more direct. He said I was making this into a bigger deal than it needed to be, that family helps family, that I had skills and resources that could make a real difference for my brother and his kids, and that using my vacation to do something meaningful for the people I loved was not a punishment. It was a privilege. He said if I couldn't see that, that was a character issue. A character issue. I thanked him for the call and hung up. I sat in my kitchen for probably 20 minutes without moving. I thought about the beach house I'd been looking at, a rental on the Carolina coast, nothing extravagant, a small place with a screened porch and a view of the water. I'd bookmarked it 4 months ago. I'd been picturing myself there with coffee and a stack of books and absolutely nothing required of me for the first time in what felt like my entire adult life. I thought about the $11,000. I thought about the contractor, a guy named Pete, reliable, reasonably priced, who I'd already had a preliminary conversation with about timing. I thought about my brother's text, the thumbs up, let me know what contractors you're thinking. And then I thought about something my therapist said to me once, which is that the most dangerous thing about being the capable one in a family is that capability gets mistaken for obligation. That the better you are at things, the more those things get taken from you as assumption rather than asked for as favor. I opened my laptop. I went to my email and found the thread with Pete. I wrote him a short note telling him the project was on hold indefinitely and that I'd be back in touch when timing was better. He responded within the hour saying no problem, he'd keep the window clear for now, but would need to know by end of month. I went to my banking app. The $11,000 was sitting in a dedicated savings account I'd labeled Bro House Project. I transferred it to my main savings. Then I went to the vacation rental site and booked the Carolina Beach House. 2 full weeks. Screened porch, water view. Cancellation policy reviewed, deposit paid, confirmation email received. I did not tell anyone. I went to bed. The week before my vacation, my brother texted 3 times about contractor recommendations. I didn't respond to any of them. My mom called twice. My dad sent a single text that said, "We expect you at your brother's on the 14th. Not a question. An expectation in 12 words. I called in a personal favor to a colleague who does residential work and sent my brother a single text with 2 contractor names and their numbers and the words, "These are both reliable. Good luck with the project." Then I turned on Do Not Disturb and started packing for the coast. I drove down on a Thursday afternoon. The traffic cleared once I got past the city limits, and by the time I hit the 2-lane roads that meant I was getting close, something in my chest had physically loosened. I stopped at a farm stand and bought tomatoes and peaches and a jar of local honey. I found the rental key in the lockbox, walked inside, stood in the middle of the living room with the afternoon light coming through the windows, and for the first time in a very long time, felt nothing that needed to be managed. I didn't check my phone until Saturday morning. I had missed 11 calls, 4 from my brother, 3 from my mom, 2 from my dad, 1 from my sister-in-law, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my aunt, which meant my mother had escalated to bringing in reinforcements. There was also a string of texts. My brother wanted to know where I was. My mom said the contractors I'd referred couldn't start until later in the month, and she didn't understand why I hadn't just handled it. My sister-in-law sent a long message that started warmly and ended with the sentence, "We just thought we could count on you," which is one of the more sophisticated guilt delivery mechanisms I've ever encountered. My dad's text said, "Call me. This has gone far enough." I read them all. I put the phone down. I went out to the screened porch and drank my coffee and watched a pelican work the shoreline. Then I wrote one message to the family group chat. I kept it simple. I said I was on vacation, which I had mentioned and been dismissed about, and I hoped the renovation planning was coming together. I said I'd sent 2 strong contractor referrals. I said I loved them and I'd be in touch when I was back. My brother's response arrived in about 2 minutes. It was not brief. He said I was being passive-aggressive. He said I had promised to help, which was a word I had never used, not once, in any message or conversation, and that backing out at the last minute was a betrayal. He said the contractors I'd referred were too expensive and the timeline didn't work, and if I had just shown up like a normal person and done what I said I would do, the family wouldn't be in this position. The family wouldn't be in this position. I stared at that sentence. The family. As though there were a crisis, as though something had been lost, as though I had caused harm by taking a vacation I was entitled to take. I thought about something I'd been turning over for a few days, something that had started as a vague discomfort and sharpened into a concrete question. My brother had a good job. Project manager at a logistics company, had been there 4 years, solid salary. His wife worked part-time at a physical therapy practice. They weren't struggling, so why, exactly, was funding a full kitchen renovation plus deck plus bathroom plus interior paint job supposed to fall on me? Even setting aside my time and expertise, why wasn't he simply, normally, hiring contractors and paying for the work himself? I got off the porch and went to my laptop. I want to be clear that I don't love doing this. It's not something I'm proud of, but I've done enough real estate transactions to know how to read a financial picture. And something about the insistence, the aggression, the way my parents had immediately lined up behind him. It felt like more than entitlement. It felt like desperation wearing entitlement's clothes. I looked at property records first. His house. There was a second mortgage on it, a HELOC, opened 18 months ago. The line of credit was for $40,000. I checked what I could find about the draw history. Based on the recorded amounts, it looked like most of it had been used. I checked public court records for his county. It took a while, but I found it. A civil judgment from 8 months ago, a home goods credit account, past due, balance of $9,200. Status unsatisfied. There was a second one, more recent. A personal loan, a fintech lender, $14,500, also unsatisfied. I leaned back in my chair. They were in serious financial trouble. Not just tight, not just cash flow bumpy, the kind of trouble where you've been moving money around for long enough that the structure is starting to fail. The HELOC was almost certainly extended for repairs the house needed, but the draw was used for what exactly? The credit card judgments suggested the money had been absorbed elsewhere. Daily life, consumption, keeping up appearances. My $11,000 wasn't a gift they were hoping for. It was a structural necessity they were counting on. And my free labor, my 2 weeks on-site managing contractors, using my professional contacts, making calls on their behalf, was the other half of the solution. They couldn't afford to pay contractors market rates. They couldn't afford to manage a project they weren't equipped to manage. They needed me to do it for free, with my money funding the materials, because without that combination, the renovation simply wasn't happening. The deck, the kitchen, the bathroom, these weren't cosmetic wants. Some of them were probably necessary for insurance compliance, for the home to pass any kind of inspection. The situation was more serious than I'd understood. I sat with that for a while. I felt something complicated happen. Not quite sympathy, not quite fury. Something more like grief. The kind you feel when you've wanted something to be one thing for a long time, and the evidence is finally too clear to argue with. I had wanted to give him a beautiful surprise. I had spent 3 months imagining his face when I showed up and said, "I'm doing this for you." I had wanted to be the person who came through. And instead, I was looking at a financial record that told me I'd been cast as a resource before I ever had the chance to be a sister. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send a message with what I'd found. I thought about it. Considered writing to my parents, explaining the full picture. But I knew what would happen. My mom would cry and say she hadn't known, and then tell me I needed to help him anyway. My dad would find a way to make it my responsibility to fix, and my brother would feel exposed and humiliated and double down. Cornered animals don't express gratitude. So I stayed on vacation. I read 4 books that first week. I went to bed when I felt like it and woke up without an alarm. I cooked real meals. Not work night meals. Not sad desk lunches. Actual meals I took my time over, sitting at a table by the window. I kayaked twice. I got a massage at a place in town that cost $120 and was worth every dollar. The calls kept coming. I let most of them go to voicemail. I responded to my mom once briefly, saying I was okay and I'd talk soon. I didn't engage with my brother's messages, which had moved through anger into something more manipulative. He sent a photo of his kids in front of the house with the deck visible in the background, sagging and weathered. No caption, just the photo. I looked at it for a long time. I love those kids, but a photo was not an argument and guilt was not a plan. Midway through the second week, my aunt, my mom's sister, who I'd always been close to, texted me directly. Not in the group chat, just to me. She said she'd heard some of what was happening, and she wanted me to know she didn't think I was wrong to take my vacation. She said she'd seen this pattern my whole life and she was proud of me. That was all. I read it probably 4 times. I came home on a Sunday. I had a good tan and a clear head and a list of things I wanted to do differently going forward. The drive back felt different from every other drive I'd taken back from somewhere. Usually I spent those hours dreading re-entry, tallying what awaited me, bracing. This time I just drove. I listened to music I liked. I stopped for gas and a terrible fast food coffee and didn't feel guilty about any of it. My brother called that evening. I picked up. He didn't yell, which surprised me. He sounded tired. He said the renovation still hadn't started and the deck had now been flagged by the homeowner's insurance and they needed it replaced within 60 days or they'd lose coverage. He said things were tight right now and he could really use my help. He said he knew he'd handled this badly. It was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get from him, and we both understood that. I told him I heard him. I told him I was sorry he was in a hard spot. I told him I was not going to fund the renovation or manage the project, but I would make a single call to Pete and ask him to give my brother a contractor's honest assessment and a fair quote. That was what I could offer. My brother said that wasn't enough. I told him I understood that, and I was sorry, but it was what I had. He hung up. My parents called the following week, together on speakerphone, a format they reserve for situations they consider serious. My dad did most of the talking. He said my brother and his wife were facing genuine hardship. He said families carry each other through hardship. He said I had the means to help and was choosing not to, and that was a decision they would not forget. I said something I'd been assembling quietly for weeks. I said I had spent years trying to buy my way into being appreciated by this family. I said I'd paid for things quietly. I'd given money without asking for credit. I'd planned a renovation as a surprise because I wanted to feel like my presence was something more than a financial instrument. I said the morning my brother sent me a task list instead of a phone call asking for help was the morning I understood that I had never been seen as a person in this equation, only as a resource. I said I was no longer willing to fund situations designed around my absence. I said I loved them and I wanted a relationship with them, but the relationship had to include me, my limits, my needs, my time, not just my bank account. My mom cried. My dad said I was being dramatic. They ended the call. That was 4 months ago. My brother ended up selling the Range Rover his wife drove. I found out through my aunt. They used some of the equity to fund the deck replacement, which was legally required, and they're on a payment plan with a contractor for the kitchen. It's slower and more modest than what I had planned to do, but it's happening. My brother is working with a credit counselor now. My aunt told me that too. My sister-in-law sent me an email last month. It was carefully written, the kind of email where you can tell every sentence was considered. She said she knew she'd put unfair pressure on me. She said she'd spent a long time thinking about how her household stress had been exported onto me and that she was working on it. She said the kids missed me. That last part I let myself feel. I haven't fully reconciled with my brother yet. I'm not sure what that looks like. My therapist says I'm allowed to set the pace. I think I always knew that, technically, but it's different to hear someone say it like it's true. What I did do, I took the $11,000 I'd pulled back from the house project and split it. Half went toward an emergency fund I'm building with more intention than I've applied to most things in my life. The other half I put into a 529 account for each of my niece and nephew, 50-50. It's for college, and neither my brother nor his wife can touch it. I still want to be their aunt. I still want to show up for those kids. I just finally understand that showing up doesn't require me to disappear. The beach house was $1,800 for 2 weeks. It was the best money I ever spent. Not because it was luxurious, but because I came back a different person than the one who drove away. One who understood, finally, that the love I'd been trying to earn had always been mine to give to myself first. The morning I drove away from that beach house, I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before starting the engine, not because I was dreading going back. For once, I wasn't. I just wanted to hold on to the feeling a little longer. The particular quiet of 2 weeks where nobody needed anything from me, and I hadn't needed to be anything other than myself. I've been thinking about what it actually cost me to get to that point. Not the $1,800 for the rental. Not the $11,000 I pulled back, not even the years of money I gave away without keeping score. What it cost me was the slower thing, the willingness to stay in a story about myself that wasn't true, the story that said if I was useful enough, generous enough, capable enough, I would eventually earn something that should have never required earning in the first place. What I did with the renovation money, splitting it between my own emergency fund and my niece and nephew's 529 accounts, was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, at least to myself. It was the first financial decision I'd made in years that was grounded in something real rather than something I was hoping would happen. The kids didn't create the situation. They don't deserve to carry it. And I don't deserve to keep bleeding money into a dynamic that returns nothing but expectation. There's a thing I've come to understand about cause and effect that has nothing to do with punishment or payback. It's simpler than that. When you consistently absorb the consequences of other people's choices, their debt, their avoidance, their refusal to live within reality, you don't protect them. You just delay the moment when reality arrives. My brother and his wife were drowning, and for years I had been showing up with a bucket bailing water out of a boat they kept filling with holes. The kindest thing I ever did for them, maybe, was put the bucket down. That took something I had to build slowly. It wasn't natural for me. I was raised to be the fixer, the capable one, the one who shows up, choosing not to show up, even knowing I had the resources, even knowing the deck was failing and the kids would notice, required a kind of internal toughness I hadn't fully developed yet. The version of me who drove to the coast instead of my brother's house was not the same person who had been quietly setting aside renovation money for 3 months out of hope. She was somebody who had looked at the evidence clearly and made a decision grounded in reality rather than the relationship she wished she had. That's the part that still sits with me. The clarity. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just the plain sight of a situation once I stopped squinting at it through the lens of what I wanted it to be. I had wanted a brother who saw me. I have a brother who is working with a credit counselor and trying to figure out how to keep his family afloat. Those two things can both be true, and neither of them requires me to disappear into the gap between them. The $1,800 beach house, $4, a pelican working the shoreline. That was what fair looked like, finally, for me.